Hello, everyone. Really happy to be here. Thank you for having me at La Product Conf here in Madrid. It's fantastic to have an excuse to visit Madrid also. Beautiful place. And I will be talking about Shape Up a bit. I'll talk a little bit about how it's expanding beyond companies who are just like Basecamp to a wider variety of companies, especially companies who are bigger or who have a different funding model. But before we do that, I want to just talk very honestly about what is going on with our work in a, day-to-day, what we have to deal with in the product management role. And this talk is for those of you who are in the product management role, who are like in the middle of all of the different things that are going on, trying to deliver projects. And also, I heard that we have a few people who are in product leadership here. So I think that you can look at it from both angles. But I just want to start with what is actually going on today? There are so many things that we are supposed to be doing if you watch YouTube videos and listen to conference talks about product management. We are supposed to be doing analysis and doing discovery and talking to customers every day, and we're supposed to be, making the business go into the right direction. But in reality, we are dealing with situations like this. So something is supposed to be finished. There's some project that is supposed to be happening now or was already supposed to be finished a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And this is sometimes us, right, talking to the team, why isn't the work done yet? Or it's a stakeholder talking to us in the product management role saying, why isn't the project done yet? And if we look at why it isn't finished yet, well, sometimes it's like this, because there were some complications, there were some things that we didn't know when we said we're going to start the project, right? It also happens that in the product role, it's very often kind of the product manager and the designer who are somehow coming up with what to do, and then giving this work to the technical people. And when we give it to the technical people, a lot of surprises come up. So this is another situation you may see. The designer creates the beautiful Figma file. Everything is already perfect, right? But then you give this file to the technical people and they say, it's actually not happening, right? And why? Because it didn't reflect what was technically possible. It was a designer's dream of what should be built, but it didn't actually reflect the reality of what could be built according to the technical facts, right? The systems we're using, the code we're using, all of that stuff. We also see another case happening a lot of the time. This is where there's some kind of a brief, there is some kind of a requirements document, there is something which describes the customer outcome, the business outcome that we want. But when we look at what's actually written there, it says, powerful, fast, and easy. There's no trade-offs there. Just it should be powerful, fast, and easy. And when this goes to the technical people, they say, I have no idea what to actually build. Right? I hear it should be fast and easy, and it should make us money. But how do we actually build? What do we actually do? Even when the designers and the technical people and the product people all collaborate and come up with some concept which makes sense, which is coherent, which addresses the different things that have to be handled, when it's time to actually do the work, most of us have a process that looks like this. People call it, what is it called? Scrum? But I like to think of it as a paper shredder, because it takes something that made sense, that you could understand, that had relationships, that had connections between different things. The reason why this is here is because this is here, and this is a trade-off that was made. All of that information gets lost when we think that we can just turn it into separate tickets. And IKEA is actually very good at this, but I think that most of us are not IKEA. We are not creating the perfect modular components which will all assemble exactly the way that we think, right? This is like our kind of fantasy, that if we can just create tickets for the different parts, that somehow they will all perfectly fit together. But we are not experts at creating a perfectly modular system. This is not going to happen project after project. So what happens instead? Well, all of these different people who were assigned tickets, they have to come into a line and they say, I'm blocked, I don't know what to do. This wasn't possible the way I thought it was. What are we going to do, right? I don't understand the meaning of this. Like, how do I make this trade-off? Should I make it more performant or should I make it faster? So we have a lot of unanswered questions. We have a lot of things coming up because nobody sees the full picture anymore. They just see these individual tickets. These things are very normal. I can tell by your reaction that you recognize some of these things. But actually, today especially, it is not okay to keep having these problems again and again and again. The situation has changed over the last 10 years. I mean, this whole concept of product management and the product role only really became well known. It only became popular within the last 10 years. And as you know, this conference is something still fairly new, which is growing year after year. And most people who come into the product role today, it was inside this period when there was tons of money flying around, right? The investors were throwing money everywhere, and it was all about growth at all costs. No, growth regardless of the cost. It was like the only thing that mattered was top-line growth. And especially those who are involved in the startups and the scale-ups know that now there is a shift back to the basics, back to normal. Actually, the last 10 years were not normal. And the shift backwards is to using our time well, being efficient, and being profitable. When we look at all of these different problems that are happening, of course it's frustrating when we create the design and then the programmer cannot do anything with it, right? Or when we prepare the whole brief and then we give it to the technical people and it comes back to us because of all the unanswered questions. But what's really happening here is there's a lot of waste, expensive waste. And as companies tighten up, as we start to look at, are we really able, do we have the muscle, do we have the ability to deliver things on time the way that we intended to deliver them, we're finding that actually this is something that we're going to come under more and more pressure where we have to solve this. It's not okay just to keep throwing work away and going in circles. But nobody taught us how to work this way if we came into this role within the last 10 years, because no one was focused on efficiency. So, and you know, I understand that it's a frustration that sometimes as product managers, what we would like to do is, you know, create the new strategy of everything. And then we're asked to focus on delivery. But one of the reasons that the job titles are talking about delivery all the time is because delivery is broken. And if we cannot get work out the door, if we can't finish work, honestly, it doesn't actually matter what our strategy is. It doesn't matter how intelligent our concept is for what to build. We have to have that muscle, that ability to actually build things and release things. And then when we have the ability to get things done, then we can say, okay, we know how to make things, but what is the intelligent thing to make? What is the meaningful thing to make? So this is something that I have been focused on for about 20 years. I started at 37 Signals in 2003. And when I came in, I was a UI designer, so I was doing hands-on interface design. And I found that I couldn't actually make the things that I was picturing into my mind into real projects unless I understood better what the programming half meant, you know, how the technical side worked. I didn't want to do this thing where I just made the drawing and the programmer said no, right? So I learned programming. And then I became this person who kind of was in between two different roles, where I knew how the design side worked, and I knew more about the programming side. So I got into this role, which we didn't really know what the title meant at the time, but I got into this kind of product manager role around 2009. And then once I knew how to build things, then it felt good to be able to say, okay, whatever we envision, we can ship it, and we can ship it on time, and we can ship it at the level of quality we want. But then the next question became, well, now that we have this ability, what is important to do? So this is where I shifted more into a strategy role, and then spent some years as head of strategy at Basecamp. And then over the last few years, I've been working with teams to solve all the different kinds of problems that I mentioned in the beginning of this talk, right? And especially doing it with a wider variety of teams, but we'll come to that. So I want to tell you a little bit about the things that I learned from the beginning working at Basecamp, working at 37 Signals with those guys, because it was a really unique experience. When we first started building Basecamp in 2003, there was basically two designers, myself and the founder, Jason, and then the co-founder, David, was the CTO. He was the only programmer. And David only allowed 10 hours a week for programming. It meant that if we were going to get anything done, we had to use that time very, very well. We had to be very efficient with the 10 hours that David had, otherwise nothing would get finished. And then even when the company started to grow and it became more successful, Jason and David were very slow about hiring new people. So we always had this feeling like we don't have enough time, we don't have enough people, we have to use the limited capacity that we have. And so we were kind of in a situation where we were always doing trial and error to try and understand how do we get the most out of the time that we have, how can we be really cost efficient and still ship things that are meaningful over and over again. So we kind of figured some things out over the years by being in this very constrained situation, kind of the opposite of what's been common over the last 10 years, more broadly in the industry. So we would play a game with ourselves, for example. Because we didn't want to have these kind of never-ending projects with unfinished work hanging around, we would ask ourselves, okay, here's something we want to build. What's the version of this that we could finish and deploy in 6 weeks? But then also, what if we had to finish it in 1 week? What if we had to finish it in 2 weeks, right? How would changing the time constraint lead us to new creative ideas for what the solution could be? So this was one thing that we were always kind of playing with, this time box as a design constraint, as a creative constraint, instead of just picking the first thing and then estimating it and trying to go build it. We would put the technical and design people together very early, like day 1, day 0. Right when we first had an idea to do something, it's like, okay, here's why we think this is meaningful, but also here from the technical side is how we think it's feasible. And this is something that was happening very, very big in the very early parts of the project so that they didn't blow up with those unexpected complexities later. We got into the habit of making really rough drawings that showed the important relationships, the key elements of an idea. So we weren't making these Figma drawings and then throwing them away and then making a new one and throwing it away, but we were doing a rough drawing that had kind of the important architectural elements so that we could be sure it was something that was going to work and then move forward and later bring in those finer details. And by doing these different things, by working out the implementation detail a bit earlier, by having technical people involved, by not doing a big design phase with all these Figma things in the beginning, we were able to solve the important questions earlier, give that to a team, and then give the team the autonomy that they could work out the details. And it meant that when the team had everything that they needed and they could just kind of run with this and solve it for themselves, that they weren't standing there in line with the ticket saying, what does this mean? What do I do next? I'm blocked. But they were able to keep moving. And because of that, it meant that there's more time to think strategically about what's next because we are not herding the cats or running after people all the time to make sure that the project finishes on time. So these are things that we figured out in a trial and error, organic way over the years. But also, even the things that worked for us, eventually we started to hire more and more people, and we found that it didn't happen automatically anymore. It wasn't transferring just by having lunch together or being in the same room together, that we needed some way to kind of formalize this so that we could teach it to new people who came into the company. And that's why I ended up writing Basecamp, or writing ShapeUp. And ShapeUp kind of formalized all these things that we figured out. And that idea of what is the amount of time we strategically want to spend on this as opposed to the estimate, this got the name appetite, right? So instead of saying, here is what we want to build, how long will it take, we would say, how much time do we want to spend? And then what can we come up with that fits inside of that? Totally different approach. This idea of making trade-offs and figuring out what is really possible inside of the scope, what are the cost of different parts, and what's going to fit in that time box, also including the technical implementation. We called this shaping. Shaping the work to fit inside of the real constraints that we have so we can finish on time. All those things about rough sketches instead of Figma files, we kind of turned these into some specific practices, especially breadboarding, which allows us to get into the important details very quickly in a live session together. And originally, we were working only in 6 weeks, and the Basecamp as a company still works in 6-week cycles, but we've since found that actually this number 6 weeks is not important for applying shape-up. So I'll mention that early on in the beginning here. So I put this together into the book. And what we found was that a lot of companies who were just like Basecamp were able to apply it. I got a lot of emails from startups who were bootstrapped saying, fantastic, this describes some things that we were always thinking we might be able to do, and now we're doing it just like you, and it's great. But all of those companies who were able to just run with it and apply it, they had very specific attributes that matched the structure of Basecamp as a company. They were bootstrapped. So they didn't have the external pressures that VC-funded companies have or that larger companies have. You know, when you have a lot of external pressures, then you don't have control of your time, and you cannot say, we'll just do another cycle, or we'll get it the next cycle, or it's a totally different situation. At Basecamp, it was mostly senior, and also we had designers on every team, so these cross-functional teams were able to collaborate constantly. But if you look at most companies, they're not like that, right? They have these external pressures, and therefore, this idea of 6-week cycles and 2 weeks in between, it totally doesn't fit. Most companies, especially venture-backed companies, are going to say, we need to be able to change direction faster than that. Very few companies are full of only senior people, right? And if you have a lot of junior people on the team, then this idea that we're going to roughly shape the work somehow and give it to them, and they are going to then flesh it out themselves and be autonomous, it's like, how can I trust people who are not as experienced to make all those decisions inside of the cycle? This also doesn't fit for a lot of companies. And finally, most companies don't have this ratio of designers to programmers that Basecamp has. Usually you see more like 1 designer for every 10 engineers. And in situations like that, then the questions come up of like, well, how are we actually going to get to that polished level of UX that we want? How is this going to work, right? So what you would think is that, well, a lot of companies just wouldn't use ShapeUp because it doesn't match. And surprisingly, I was getting email after email and LinkedIn message after LinkedIn message saying, hey, ShapeUp doesn't really work for us, but we've been adapting it and we're trying these parts of it, and it's actually, this is working, but this isn't, and can you help us to figure out how to make it work for us? And I kept getting more and more requests from people saying, how do we actually make this work for our company? And the only reason that I can understand that is because there seem to be no other good alternatives on the market right now. If you talk to the engineers about what we should do differently, then they're going to say, well, we just need better tickets with better story points, right? If only we can estimate better, then everything will get fixed. And we know that tickets are fine for dealing with support requests, for dealing with things that are unexpectedly broken, for urgent things, for reactive work. But for project planning, tickets are not helping. And we've all already learned that if Agile works for you, that's fantastic, but most of us are learning that it doesn't solve it. And of course, there's also a push to do more and more discovery up front. Like, let's go through these long discovery phases where we talk to more customers, and we do a lot of design sprints, and we do a lot of user journeys and personas. But what's happening in real life is after a lot of time where the designers are saying, please let us do more discovery, they give the work to the engineers, and the engineers say, I still don't know what to do with this. I have 100 hours of audio, I have all kinds of personas, but I still don't know what to build, right? So this is a problem. This needs to get fixed somehow. So people keep asking for how to apply it, and I understood that we needed to adapt and evolve ShapeUp so that it could be used by companies who weren't just like Basecamp. You know, bigger companies and companies who were in these different circumstances. And that's actually exactly what we've been doing. We have a new course that we've been teaching, which is called Shaping in Real Life. And the shift here is from kind of the one true way, as it's presented in the book, to different individual practices and tools which we can mix and match and say, okay, I will use that and I will use that, and these other things don't apply to me, right? And things that can be adapted to our working environment. So I want to give you just a little bit of a taste of what I've been learning by working with a variety of other companies and what's in shaping in real life, so that you have some things you can take away with you and that you can start using. So here comes kind of a crash course, okay? And the first thing is to talk about this word shaping for a moment. Think about, what is that work that product, it starts with product, or starts with an idea from the executive team, or starts with a feature request, or starts with sales, or wherever it is. There's some idea that comes in, and some work has to happen before we're ready to give that to engineers to actually build something, right? So when I use this word shaping, it's not some special method. It's just a thing that we all have to do somehow. So it's something that we all do. And it's about getting from an idea to something that's actually buildable. If we look at whatever it is that our company is doing to do this, right? Whatever our company is doing to shape, we're going to see some of those things that we talked about earlier. We're going to see this like long document that has a lot of analysis and intelligent business rationale, but it doesn't actually say what to build, right? It describes a business outcome or a customer outcome, but it doesn't say this component and this architecture connect in this way to actually do the thing, to make it work. And in a case like this, we can say that this is undershaped, right? So think of this as diagnosing your work, right? If it's too fuzzy, if it's too soft, if it's not saying what to do, it's going to go to the engineers and they're going to say, I don't know what this means, and they're going to come back with questions. The other extreme is the Figma file, right? And this is overshaped. There's too much detail there, and there's too many things there that have to get thrown away. Very often, these go together. So for example, imagine that we are going to be renovating a living room in an apartment, and we're going to have new paint on the walls and new furniture, and we have this beautiful rendering of exactly how it's going to look, right? And we've chosen a lamp that's going to be on the wall, and this lamp is like the perfect lamp. We've found exactly the lamp that we want, and we spent a long time searching for it, and here we have this beautiful image, right? Well, the thing that we might not have figured out if we didn't involve the technical people is the important question of, is there actually electricity in that wall, right? Because if we don't know that, now we have to punch open a hole in the wall, and now we have a big project which is going to blow the budget of. It's going to take 2 times as long, or two times as much money than we thought, right? So very often when we're giving too much detail on the surface, so we're kind of overshaping on the surface, but we're undershaping. We're not giving enough detail on what it means technically to actually go do it. So when we talk about well-shaped work, it's work that doesn't bounce back. It doesn't come back to us with what about this and what about that, and we can't actually start. It doesn't get reworked and thrown away at the last minute, where we think it's ready and then we give it to technical people, and then it has to get completely rethought out during the sprint planning process or whatever process we have there. And it doesn't blow up with unexpected complexity after the cycle starts. So this is where we say, okay, is this happening to us? Are we overshaping? Are we undershaping? And now what would we like to do differently? So the way that we can start to do it differently, so this is just to sum up, that we need it to be more concrete and more feasible, right? So it actually fits the constraints. The first thing that we can do to start to improve the situation is to hold what are called shaping sessions. So a shaping session is a live work session. So this is not a meeting. This is where we actually get together and we do the work. It's not a review session. It's not like somebody did work and now 3 people are going to de-risk it or somehow evaluate it. No, we go in, and all we know is the business problem we're trying to solve and some constraints that we have and the outcome we want, but we have no idea like what it is that we're actually going to draw or specify as a schematic or whatever it is. We don't know what the solution is going to be. And it's 2 to 3 hours of intense time together. And the idea is that we're actually going to cover more ground in this session. We're not going to work independently and then hand it off and then review and back and forth, but we're going to do the work there. And the way that we encounter all of these unanswered questions and technical problems sooner is by involving in this 2 to 3 hour session the technical person. So we have this role that we can call a technical shaper. It might be the lead engineer on the project. It might be a senior engineer who is the person that you work with best in the org, that you know the best, who you can trust to pull in. But what happens when we bring the technical person in early is we have a completely different design process. We have a completely different experience. So here, you can think of these shaping sessions as having the product person who represents that knowledge of the outcome we're trying to reach, of what's going on with the business and the customer. A designer who knows what's possible in terms of interaction design, what will be a process that people can follow that will make sense and will work from a user standpoint. And this technical shaper who represents engineering, what's going to be possible. And we often hear, that these three should collaborate somehow. But here we're talking about a very structured process with this 2 to 3 hour session. And we're going to bridge gaps between these roles from day 0. Let me show you an example of this. So here we are in a shaping room. And a technical shaper is there with the product person and the designer. And the product person makes a suggestion of what they think we're trying to do here. So the product person says, we have this step in our onboarding flow. And we believe that we have the data from a partner, so we can just pipe this data in and we can skip that step, and it's going to improve our conversion. And this is the kind of thing where someone says, skip a step, sounds perfect, let's just skip the step, easy, right? But when the technical person is in the room, at that very moment, right away, this is like in the first 15 minutes of the session, they can open their laptop and they can say, you know what, let me have a look at the code here. And let's see if that thing that we're going to skip is as simple as it seems. And they can find out that actually there isn't one step that we can skip. That part of onboarding has 3 different states depending on the integration and depending on the partner and blah, 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 right? So there's way more involved than just skipping a step. And this normally comes up on week 3 or week 4, after the project has already gone into the engineering team to start building. And here, on the very, very first design session, right, product and design, they have not prepared anything in advance. They're finding out, that's not going to work. We're going to have to rethink this. So these are the kind of things that we want to discover on day 0. In these sessions, if you pull the technical person in and you have this 2 to 3 hour shaping session, then the other thing we can do here is we don't just kind of have the very first idea and then follow it out, but we can explore multiple paths together. So we say, okay, what is the version if we spent the full 6 weeks that we budgeted to do this? What's the version if we only had 1 week and we had to do a total hack? What would we do there? And by exploring different alternatives at different costs and using different technologies or different options, then we can start to really discover what is the best possibility that's going to work. As we start to identify option A, B, and C, different paths forward, we can also challenge assumptions. We can dig deeper into those different unknowns. So here, we can use a technique called spiking. And basically the idea of a spike is that we're at one level and we say okay, we think we're going to pre-fill that data, but how do we know it's going to work with the validation code, let's say, on that step? And we have to go deeper, look into how the system actually works, learn something, and come up and say, yeah, it's going to work like we expected. It's like if you are doing a renovation in a bathroom and you hire the plumber needs to actually look at what's behind the walls to understand the pipes, to tell you the real cost of the project and what it's involved, right? So this is like a spike. So when the group is there in the shaping session, we can look at individual pieces of the solution that's been sketched out and say, yeah, but is that really true? Yes, but how do we know that's going to work? Does that really fit with the data format that we think we're going to get from that API or whatever it is, right? There are some details here, but I'll just touch it quickly that we're looking for things that can blow up the project. This is like Alfonso was saying about challenging assumptions earlier, but we are very tactically looking for those things and saying at the end of this 3 hours, For us to say that this session was a success, we need to have both an approach and individual things that we've identified that we have to answer before this work is safe to move forward. So what we do is we actually define these questions as small work assignments. So you can think of it as like a ticket that's not go build this thing. It's not go deploy this thing. It's learn the answer to this thing so that we can know what we're getting into on a piece of work that we're considering. And these are not, this is very important, these are not yes or no questions. If we say, is this possible? And someone will say, oh yeah, it should be fine, right? And then when you get into the cycle, it blows up. Or you say, is this possible? And they say, no, that part of the code is terrible. We haven't touched it in 5 years. But if we really looked at it, we might find a way. So the answer to the spike should always be, how is it possible? Or what would it entail to do it, not yes or no. So once we've actually answered the spikes, then we have a place where those assumptions have been filled in, we have the knowledge we need, and then we can make trade-offs and we can compare alternatives. You know, making trade-offs is like where we say, I'm willing to give something up in order to move forward. And a lot of times, for example, when we don't want to make a trade-off, this is where you hear, well, let's just make it a preference, right? Or let's just make it a setting. And when we do that, we're actually adding more work to the project. So when we don't make trade-offs, the project just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But when we make trade-offs, then we can actually say, you know what, I'm willing to have fewer fields if we can make sure that the user moves faster through this step and we have better conversion, even though it means we'll have less data to query, right? And we could make the number of fields optional or something like that, but then it's even more work and we don't have time for that. So there comes a point where we have looked at different options. We have identified spikes. Maybe we have done some tiny little pieces of work to answer those really important, risky questions. We've made some trade-offs, and now we can say, here is a path that we think is the right path, and then we can package this up. So we can take everything that we learned by digging deep into the real work, not just the surface-level painting of what we hope it will be, but the real work of what it's going to mean to build it and how it's going to fit together. We can package that into this one document that we call it the package, because it's like the shaped work is packaged and ready for delivery. And here there's the problem, what we're trying to solve, you know, kind of like in a good brief, but also the key relationships of the technical solution. So this goes into a document that the team can take forward. And here, if we've done a good job in the shaping, it means that we have answered those unanswered questions, and we've addressed those landmines in the technical solution that could blow up as unknowns later. Remember that in the kind of the before picture, there's all of this disconnect between what we thought we were going to do and what turns out to be possible, or what we thought that the team understood and what they really understood. And it led to all of this wasted time. And it's not just wasted time, like if we add up the hours. From the product manager's standpoint and from all the different people in the team standpoint, it's like our wasted time that we can't use on other things. If we are busy unblocking people all the time, if we are busy running in circles, then we are not able to do the things that are actually really important, that are going to move the business forward and move our careers forward or give us the satisfaction that we want. So the end goal, when we actually get better at shaping this stuff, is that the team, because we've solved those things earlier and packaged it together, the team actually has more autonomy. And when the team has more autonomy, it means that when they're building something, we can say, very good, they're building, now I can think about other things. Now I can be more strategic. Now I can do those customer interviews, or I can grow in different ways that I want to. So if there's one thing that you take away from the talk, it's that basic principle of bringing technical people in earlier, answering the hard questions about the real concrete details sooner, so that the team can be unblocked and deliver on time and deliver what we really intended at the beginning. I want to touch one other thing shortly here before we wrap up, because as product managers, we are very much split between different worlds, you know? There's the business side and the strategy and what does the customer really want and all of that stuff. And then there's the things that we've been talking about here, mainly so far. How do I actually make sure that the thing gets delivered? How do I make sure that the technical team is really successful and we keep delivering things and moving forward? There's a lot of confusion about the different types of work that we have to do in the product role. And I've been finding that some language helps. We've talked about shaping, but there's something else called framing. And a lot of times when people think that they're shaping, they're actually not. So what do I mean by this? When the product person creates this very thoughtful document that explains all the reasons why we're doing this, that aligns everybody around spending time on this thing, but it doesn't actually tell us what to go build, it's not shaped because it's not telling people what to do, but it's still valuable, right? We do need to gather that background information. We do need we have to be able to make the case, to spend time on something or to clarify the problem or clarify the outcome, but it's not actually the thing that's going to help us to make sure that the project gets delivered on time. So it really helps to recognize that this work of defining the problem and making the case to spend time on something, this work of aligning everybody on why to build this thing, it's different work. So framing is the work where we are figuring out, is this thing that actually important? Is this the thing we're supposed to be doing right now? What did the CEO mean when they told us that we're supposed to build this feature, right? And then the shaping is actually turning it into the actionable thing that we can go deliver. And if we look at what's inside of these, the framing side is more about how the business works. It's more about what the customer is trying to do. Talking to the customer about the real things that they're doing and reverse engineering that to figure out what they value, right? It's about implementing strategy. And the shaping side is about the technology, about the system, about how things connect so that it all wires together and it really works. And especially the shaping side is about how do we do what we framed at cost, right? Not just cycle after cycle or sprint after sprint until it's done, but how do we actually solve it within the amount of time that we want to spend? This is what's happening on the shaping side. And these are different ways for us to add value as product people. Some of us will be more technical and we will be able to lean more into the shaping part. Some of us are more, let's say, coming from a business background, or we're more business-minded, and we would like to be able to spend more time on the business side. But if we're busy chasing after people and unblocking delivery problems all day, we will never be able to grow in either of these areas. So I want to give you this little picture. I'm not asking you to consider adopting a framework or changing the way that you do everything. What I want to share with you is this really nice experience of improving the way that we shape a little bit, right? Removing some of those unknowns earlier, talking to technical people earlier, right? Then having that project go into delivery and having a few, let's say 10% less questions that we have to answer, right? Or 10% less things that go wrong. That's 10% more time to think about other things, right? And as we get better and we go through that loop, what we will find is that the more that we are able to shape better, the more that the team will be able to just move forward successfully with what we shaped. And while they're building, we have more time for us to think. And you can think to yourself, if I had more time where I wasn't busy with all these delivery issues, how would I use it? Would I use it to become more technical? Would I use it to go deeper into strategy, to talk to customers more, to be able to speak the language of the business more? Once we have that time, then we can decide to use it in a way which is going to help us to grow and to, especially in this environment where things are getting tighter and we have to deliver more value, figure out what that's actually going to look like for us, each of us in our own careers. So that's what I wanted to leave you with. We have a few minutes for questions. I'll give you one little short thing just to mention that if you've heard about Shape Up and you've heard maybe that it's like 6-week cycles, we've learned that this is absolutely not necessary. The key point is actually this question of time boxing and then shaping to fit into the time box. This shaped work doesn't mean that it's a fat marker sketch, that it's a question of giving the right amount of detail that the team needs to be unblocked. And that's going to depend on the project, and it's going to depend on the team. And the last thing I'll mention quickly is that if you're wondering, well, if you don't do a big Figma file up front, when does the design come in? Think about how a house gets built. Think about a kitchen remodeling. First, you figure out where the electricity goes and where the water goes and where the walls stand. And after the builders put the walls there and they get the electricity pipes in and the electrical wires, then you can choose the tile. Then you paint the walls different colors, right? You don't have to choose the tile and the color of the walls on the first day of the project. And it doesn't tell the contractors what it is that they should build and where they should put all those pipes. So actually, a lot of this graphic design, this Figma design, can happen at the end as interior design. And we're seeing some amazing results with teams who are flipping this around. So we can talk outside about this some more if you'd like to hear more about that. So that's what I wanted to share with you. If you'd like, you can check out the original book, but the shortcut is the 20-minute Shaping in a Nutshell video, which kind of gives you all the key ideas that are in the book. And then if you want to learn more about how to actually apply this in a team and how to use this language and these tools in the place where you're working, then the Shaping in a Nutshell course is a really good next step for that. You can find all of that on the website, feltpresence.com. And please, I would love to hear from you on LinkedIn. I love hearing about everybody's individual situation and what they're trying to solve or what resonated from this talk and what didn't. So I would love to get a LinkedIn message from you and to be able to continue further from there. So thanks very much, and I think we have 5 minutes for questions, hopefully.
Tenemos un par de minutos para preguntas. Aquí en el centro de aquí. ¿Al revés? ¿Sí? There. Okay.
Thank you, Ryan. This was inspiring.
Hi.
And by the way, you have a really cool name, Ryan Singer. I would love that name. Anyway, I was curious about, you have like on your latest picture there, like generally when we talk about product, we always talk about measuring afterwards. I haven't heard anything about in what you explained if you actually, close the circle and you measure after, like what happens from the shaping until delivery. Like when you deliver, it's actually very close to what it was shaped. Does it look different? What happens there?
So this question about how do we evaluate if the thing that's getting built is actually what it should be?
Yes.
Yeah, we should actually know when we're building it if we built what we intended to build. This is the first question. Are we able to build what we intend? Most teams today don't even manage to build the thing that they wanted to build. So then if you manage to build the thing, right, and then you are so busy with all the work that didn't get finished and all the problems that came up and all the bugs and all the 10 other things that people are asking you to do, there's no time to install analytics and analyze it to figure out if it worked well or not. So if you have the luxury of time to look at how the previously shipped projects did and to properly analyze that, that's fantastic. But the first thing that a lot of teams need to do is first solve the delivery so that they can actually build what they intended to build. Once you actually have a little bit of more time to do the analysis and figure out what are customers actually using, what are they not using, what are they trying to do, what matters to customers, this is that framing input that I talked about. So whatever we do, whenever we ship something, the question is always the same. What do I do next, right? And one of the inputs to what do I do next is what's working and not working about everything we did so far. And it might be the project we just shipped. It might be something we did 10 cycles ago. It might be some new idea that the CEO had in the shower. There's many inputs to framing, and the work that we just released is one possible input to that.
Okay, but sorry.
And we can also talk more on the side, because we only have a moment, so I'd be happy to keep talking in the break after. These are such big subjects too, like how do we do everything in our work, and how to talk about them in 2-minute slices.
Hi, thank you very much for the talk, super inspiring. My question is, do you think it's feasible to just test it out in a team, or do you have to apply this framework to the whole company at once? Like we are a team of
It works very well on a team-by-team basis.
Team-by-team basis, okay.
Yes, yeah. Actually, when I work with people on the executive level, I advise them to first start with one team. Because there's a learning process of figuring out how to do it. And if one team can figure out how to do it, then you can copy it more. But you will need a little bit of, you need to have authority over how the team works to try it. Right. So you need to be able to influence, and you need to be able to pull in the technical person, at least for those sessions.
Thank you.
Hi, Ryan.
Hi.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question about the live sessions. Sometimes we have senior developers, but they don't know everything about the domain, and it's going to take them a while to check feasibility about something that we need, about some idea or something. How do you do that? Do you do that
Yes.
in the live session, or?
So I'm going to say something controversial. I think this idea that the technical people should know the domain is overrated. Actually, what's happened is we as product people should be able to explain what we're trying to do in a way that is very, very simple and straightforward for the technical person to understand what we're trying to do. And when they understand the context, because we have properly explained it and framed it, then they could say, oh, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this, right? And it's their role to fill in the technical possibilities. So this is why we have different people in the organization, because we are focused and we have skills in different areas.
Yeah, sorry, I was referring to technical domain. Like,
technical domain, I'm sorry.
yeah, like maybe I don't know the answer right now and I need to check the code.
Yes. So there are going to be things that they can actually answer on the spot, and it's more than they think. So it's really 10 times more than they think. So there is a cultural thing where we don't like to get into the work in a meeting. We like to say, oh, let me go look at it and then I'll come back. But here we can say, well, let's just try. If we spend 20 seconds right now and try to look at that part of the code, just look at that part of the code where that thing is. And one very good technique there is just tell us the words in the code for what that thing is called.
Thank you.
And it takes only a moment to check that, and as soon as they see, oh, it's not called step 2, it's called primary demographic page, they're going to go, I remember, there's all these other things attached to that, right? So this is a very good start. If it's really deep and complicated, they can do a spike, and we can call the session back after a couple-hour break.
Thanks.
Okay.
I think we're at the end of time,
Yeah.
Thank you all. We'd love to be able to chat a bit more. Thanks a lot.